It's fairly common in telling a story, and even in literature or in making films, to use the idea of a journey as the basis for the story. And in the proceedings of the journey, different things can happen to make the story interesting. And the gospel that we have today for the 19th Sunday of Ordinary Time fits into that genre. It's the story of a journey. Today we have the disciples setting out in a boat across the Sea of Galilee. This was right after they and Jesus had fed the 5,000. And the gospel says that Jesus made them get into the boat and head off to go across the Sea of Galilee. It was 8 miles across the lake there. And the disciples were probably feeling pretty good at that time. It had been a good day. They had gone there with Jesus. They had fed the 5,000. The people had wanted to make Jesus king, and the disciples could say, they were the ones who gave out the food. They could say, hey, we're with him, we're okay too. So they were probably feeling pretty good, and now we're rowing across the lake, the Sea of Galilee. But then the storm arose, the waves picked up, the wind picked up, and there was real danger, and they were very frightened about dying. Probably sometimes our lives are a little bit like that. That most of our life things can go along fairly stably and everything's normal, life is good, but then out of the blue comes all sorts of difficulties. We might have problems with finances or with relationships or with sickness or disappointments. And right now, in addition to the usual common problems that people can experience, we're also experiencing all the problems connected with the pandemic. In a pre-pandemic world, when we were confronted with problems like that, we could address them in different ways. We might go and seek advice from our family, we might seek counseling, we could pray, we could practice patience, might even practice yoga. We could try all kinds of things to deal with our problems. But in our lifetime and in our life experience, probably one of the most helpful things for us when we're experiencing difficulties is to have a trusted, a loyal, an understanding friend to be with us. The friend maybe cannot cause the problems to disappear, but the friend can hold our hands, either literally or metaphorically, and can walk this difficult path with us and really, really helps us. In the gospel today, the disciples had that experience. They were in distress, and then Jesus comes to them walking across the waves as a friend, and he calls out to them, "Don't be afraid, it's me." And he gets into the boat with them, and everything calms down. Jesus relieved their anxiety. He dispelled the fears of the disciples then. And maybe he was sending a message to us who were going to live 2,000 years later. Now, these 20 centuries after Jesus took away the fears of the disciples, maybe he can do the same for us. We see Jesus going to the disciples in the boat. They call out to him. And now when we're in difficulty, we too can call out to Jesus. And what the gospel story is saying is that he will answer us. The storm won't necessarily disappear, but Jesus will be with us. We'll get through it. We'll get to the other shore. One thing that's important is that Jesus is with us as a friend, but Jesus is more than a friend. Jesus is God. And so the gospel story is saying God will be with us. God will be with you in all the difficulties of life. Jesus makes known the presence of God. And the presence of God is like an anchor that holds the boat steady and upright. Matthew wanted us to know that God is always with us. But the presence of God is not always visible in the ways that we expect. We see that in the first reading today, when the prophet Elijah experience a strong wind, an earthquake, a fire, and God was not present in any of those ways, but rather as a slight whispering sound. Maybe that's what happens to us too. In our times of distress, we don't experience God, we can't find God, we don't see any sign of help from God. But maybe it's because we're looking for the wrong thing, or the wrong answers, or maybe we're looking in the wrong places. There's something important to note in this story about Jesus helping the disciples in the boat. When Jesus helps them, he's not in the boat. He's out in that hostile environment that they're so afraid of. They're huddled together in the boat, but Jesus is not there. He's in some place that they're not looking. And that's why they're so frightened when they do see him. But Peter then steps out of the boat and goes and meets Jesus in the midst of the storm. When Matthew first wrote this gospel story, he was writing it for the people in the early church who were being persecuted. And so when he wrote the story, the image of the boat is the image of the church. The boat represents the church. And the church was going through this stormy period with all sorts of persecution. And Matthew was saying, God's going to be with you. God will protect you. And Peter, representing the church too, steps out of the boat and is able to meet Jesus and to get the help that he needs. And maybe that's another message for us too, that we need to step out of the boat. We need to look for Jesus and for help in the right places. We turn to God in times of trouble. We call out to God, but then we have to step out of the boat, make a leap of faith to find God. Maybe what this gospel story today is telling us, and maybe what our prayer should be about, is that we know that God is with us, and yet we're also in distress. We're in the middle. It's a time of tension. And maybe now in that time of tension, we need to listen for God in the whispers that come into our lives and try to find God in ways that we might not expect. We too have to step out of the boat into the place of danger and look for God there. God is there. That's what Jesus is saying. And God will be with us. He will support us. He will help us to overcome the trials of our lives.